Welcome to NREI's Common Area Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the award-winning editorial staff at nreionline.com. Let's jump right into this week's podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Common Area with your host, David Bodamer. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you? Good morning.
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful Monday morning. It's snowing where I am. Is it snowing where you're at?
No, it's raining.
Oh, okay.
So,
well,
it was a wet commute, and somehow, what's always amazing in New York City is that even though we're underground, the rain always slows the subway down.
Really? It's gonna like plow through it, or I
don't know. I don't know why, but it's just like whenever it rains, you're gonna get delayed.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we don't have too much of that problem here. You just have people sliding across multiple lanes of traffic and, all that fun stuff with snow. So.
Oh, that's always fun.
Oh, yeah. All right. So normally we talk about, we recap some news story. We talk about what's kind of been going on. We're doing something different this week. Now, from what I understand, you did some traveling.
Yes, I went up to Toronto for most of last week. I was attending a couple of conferences held back to back in Toronto. One was called the Global Property Market, and one was the annual Toronto Real Estate Forum. These are actually two shows that are run by a sister part of our parent company, Informa, called Real Estate Forums, which operates a whole bunch of commercial real estate conferences in Canada. So what was interesting for me is that, we do touch on cross-border investment in our coverage, but we are largely focused on the U.S. market. And the way we even look at foreign investment is almost entirely in reference to either what U.S. investors are doing overseas or how foreign investors are investing in the U.S. So for me, this was an opportunity to actually go and meet with and see a bunch of sessions that was just almost entirely about another market and just about like what and get a sense of what are some of the trends for commercial real estate in Canada, big focus on Toronto, but then also how it was also very interesting to see how what happens in the U.S., how what's happening in the U.S. economy, how what's happening with U.S. commercial real estate has some knock-on effects into how they're making decisions to invest in Canada itself. And then they even talked some about the way that they're investing in other markets. So there was a lot to unpack, but it was just like this really interesting set of events and a lot of really great speakers that I got to experience.
Nice. So I mean, you were there for pretty much the entire week, or at least most of it, and I mean that's a lot to digest, right? I mean I'm sure you had tons of different meetings, tons of different speakers. What were some of the highlights for you? What were some of your, I don't know if I would call them favorite parts, but where did you learn the most? What was your biggest takeaways?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the biggest, I was struck a lot by hearing so many investors and pros and whatnot talk about, sort of change the framework a little bit about how they're seeing this current cycle. And this is something we've been writing about too. We're a decade into this expansion period after the wreckage from the Great Recession, the credit crisis.
Mm-hmm.
We've had this long boom, both economically and specifically in commercial real estate. And for, I don't know, like 2 or 3 years, a very common analogy that people have talked about is, okay, what inning are we in the cycle? Are we in the 6th inning? Are we in the 7th inning? And for a while, it's like, oh, we have to be in the 9th inning. But when you're in these late innings for several years in a row, suddenly that analogy starts to break down.
Yeah.
Which is how they kind of talked about it. So it's like, maybe we're not in a baseball game anymore.
or maybe it's rain delayed because of the subway issues and all the rain. We're extra innings now.
Yeah. So like we're either in extra innings, which again is just like I think
feeding a dead analogy. Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to find a new. What you're saying is we need to find a new analogy, right? Okay.
And or even like a new analogy, or even like this conception of maybe even the cycle has changed.
Oh,
like where rather than thinking about this being a conventional cycle, that we've entered a period, like perhaps we've entered a period of low growth, and low interest rates and low inflation. And with those with that kind of combination, real estate actually sits pretty nicely. You know, when you have low overall GDP growth, that means there's real estate looks good as an asset class. Low inflation, means asset prices are not getting out of control and your costs are not getting out of control. So you have fairly stable cost and income structures. And low rates, of course, are just great for borrowing and buying in the sector. I mean, it also gives you the spread between cap rates and interest rates. It gives you it gives you a nice cushion. So even though cap rates are pretty low and interest rates stay low, you have that spread, which points to commercial real estate still being a good investment. So that was put forward by, I think, more than one person as a potential sort of period we may be in. People pointed to Japan, as a precedent for this, of an economy where you had low interest rates forever and low growth forever, but general stability. And not not necessarily looking for massive GDP growth or anything, but also not a recessionary kind of situation. And in which case, that's an acceptable environment for commercial real estate.
Yes. How long did Japan's cycle, if you want to call it that, last? With that as the example.
I mean, I think they got down to low zero interest rate. It's been like decades at this point.
Wow. Okay.
I think they've kind of had more robust periods with the global economy, but they've had near 0% interest rates for a very long time. They were, and which I think relates to another point that I was found interesting in this show, in these shows, which is, in the US, we're in this period of we were raising rate, the Fed was raising rates and now is cutting rates again. And people are worried about, there's been some talk about, are they getting too aggressive and what does this all mean? And some concern about it. But a lot of the investors here who are working, especially the ones who are working in other countries, are pointing out that interest rates in the US are still higher than they are in most other countries in the world. So it's still even with the rates coming down, they're not that concerned about it because in other places they have 0% or negative interest rates. So even the fact that the US is still kind of seen as an attractive market even on bonds, even with the rate, the return on rates coming down a little bit.
All right, with all the speakers and all the different. Now, first of all, were you all in just one big room and then the speakers just came up, or did you have breakout sessions? Did you get to move around a little bit? My legs would get tired. As far as just falling asleep and stuff. Did you get a little bit of mobility there?
A lot of the sessions were general sessions just for the whole conference, and it was interesting because it was the first part of the global property market was a smaller group, I think about 600 people, and that was just all in one room for the whole day with breaks. Then the Toronto Real Estate Forum was held over a couple of days, about maybe it was half and half of some of the sessions being general, but in a room with about a lot more people. It's almost, I think, 2,600 people were at the show. Jeez. So it was interesting being these these big panel discussions with this giant audiences. And then, but then there were also some breakouts and concurrent sessions for the other half of the conference where there'd be 4 or 5 sessions happening at once. So those were, with smaller groups.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the panel type discussions because it's not one person just up there giving a speech. There's a lot of interaction and there's a lot of, I think there's more ideas that come out of that just because I can hear different people's voices, whether it's just ideas and takeaways from me or just kind of them all working together towards some finer points of what they're getting at. So I like that a lot better. But what else did you really take away from this adventure up in Canada?
I was struck as well by how many of the speakers, regardless of what the core topic of the session was, came back to talking about technology.
Oh, really?
And in a way that I kind of hadn't really thought about, for obviously technical change is always happening. And, I've been covering this industry for almost 20 years now and seen some evolution in that time. But for a lot of it was always just about adopting a specific kind of software or just certain parts of the work process that were done a different way, becoming a little more efficient or becoming digitized or digitizing documents, that kind of thing. Now it seems like we're at a phase where the kind of changes are pretty mind bending, where people are talking about bringing AI into the industry in various ways, and then using that to also just automate processes and shorten processes and change how people can do their day-to-day jobs. Like one of the more concrete examples of that is for lenders when they're going through the process of approving loans, using AI to review documents and then review the performance of loans and learn from that, so that as new applications come in, they get smarter and smarter about, which are the loans that are performed, who are the borrowers that are performed, and I think maybe finding and doing pattern recognition and things that go beyond what we're currently capable of doing. And in the process, also shortening the approval periods for getting loans approved. So, which then changes, takes some of the stuff off of the plate of what the people that are approving the loans would have to be doing, allows them to do more deal sourcing, do more other, take some of their work off of their plate to allow them to focus on other things. So they were talking about it in ways that like both can improve the performance of, we'll have less defaults, we'll close loans faster, we'll also then be able to free people up to do more deal sourcing. So kind of just using a technology to create like efficiencies in ways that you couldn't just do even with like a spreadsheet.
AI is going to be everywhere. I mean, it's interesting how it's going to be in every sector of every type of field out there eventually. And for better or worse, right? I mean, that's the question.
Right.
And especially you, David, I when PCs were a little bit newer, I was totally geeked out on them, and you can change the different sounds in the machine and so on and so forth. And so out of curiosity, do you have the HAL 9000 thing where it says, "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that" thing? Do you get that on your computer whenever there's an error? That'd be great.
I think I may have had that once. But
you just got to get it back now, because now you're talking about this stuff. So really, from your take, how do you think AI is really going to affect the real estate industry in this next 5 to 10 years?
I think it could be that first example, I think, as a way that helped me understand it. I could see that similar sort of AI playing a role in helping automate like lease signings and various sections of what's happening with deals. Automating maybe some of the legal processes. I don't know, some of the document processes, the stuff that kind of like that just takes a while because it takes time to process it, takes time to originate. But if like that kind of stuff can be sped up at the end of the day, because it's not really something, and it's also something that where the AI can be learning and getting better at, that seems like there's a lot of potential there for how it's helping close deals of all types, closing investment deals, closing financing, closing leasing. And I guess the question is, obviously the elephant in the room when we talk about all this stuff is, at what point are you complementing someone's job or are you replacing someone's job?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but I think we had that with automation as far as being able to program something for triggering events, right? Yeah. So just as a really dumb example, I suppose, but I bought an Echo Dot recently, on Cyber Monday. There was a huge deal on Alexa Echo Dot. Well, I can program Alexa to do a series of things with one command. So if I say something, if I say, Alexa, go to sleep, immediately she lowers her own volume down to 2. She says a statement. She arms the security cameras. She turns off certain lights, and then she starts playing some music. Well, I programmed that all in advance. So I just say one statement. She does all of those things automatically. We've had that basic ability for paperwork and financial advisors and insurance agents and real estate agents. They've had that ability to have triggering events, but the AI takes it to another level. I think we're quite a long way away from eliminating an assistant or an executive assistant with AI. I think that it will complement their job beautifully for quite a while until it does eventually take over, So, but I think we're quite a few years from that. What are your thoughts?
I think so too. And I mean, although it seems like it's coming faster than I thought, but I agree with that. And also, I think there was another example where it was also what AI is allowing to do is not, there's the situations I talked about where it could be maybe replacing or speeding up processes, but there's also the things that AI can do that wouldn't be replacing a job, but is just going to help everybody. And one of the economists used an example of they used AI to basically read like every newspaper article that had been printed in like the past like 30 years and then like to analyze how often certain phrases that try to create an index around uncertainty. And then we're able to do that. So like by reading all of this news coverage, which no person or even a group of people would be able to do, but AI can do, read all the stuff, analyze it, create this index of certain things to create a new uncertainty index, and then use that as a tool to help predict. And then, looked at that to see how that correlated with previous recessions. And then based on that, use that as another way to help predict future recessions. And unfortunately, the way this came up is that what that index is showing is that the level of uncertainty right now is as high as it's ever been.
Oh,
so
well, there you go.
It was brought up as an example of a red flag of something we maybe want to be on the lookout for the next year.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to switch gears too much on you, but now the entire conference, both conferences are based out of Canada. Yes. And I know that this is another branch of your overall parent company, Informa. What was the general feel about investing in Canada specifically? I know that we talk a lot about investing in the United States, but what about investing in Canada currently?
So it was very interesting to meet investors that are entirely focused on another market and to learn a bit about the Canadian market. And obviously gets very overshadowed by the U.S. just because it's a much smaller market. But it's a pretty dynamic, healthy market, especially, Toronto and Vancouver came up quite a bit as for various reasons as being great places to invest, places where a lot of corporations are locating businesses for various reasons. And then that's just sustaining their real estate markets. And in some ways, there's more room for growth in some of those markets than there is in many U.S. markets. So there's been a lot less development in some places too. So there's room. There's no real supply issues. There's potential to do some real development. And this is pretty true across all property types. With the exception, retail, like in the U.S., is a little more challenged. But even that seemed like seemed more optimistic about the prospects there than what I've heard here lately. Another thing that was interesting being there was just while they have their own market dynamics, they are hyper aware of what is happening in the U.S. because it just has huge knock-on effects to their economy, which is just not a reciprocal thing. We don't pay attention to the Canadian market in the same way that they would pay attention to the U.S. just because it doesn't have like the same kind of effects on us. So it was interesting that. So I think for investors there, it's like they're very focused on the core dynamics or what are happening in Canada, and those are good, like I was saying. But then they're also just have an eye to the south, and I think one of the takeaways is that for 2020, there's just a little bit of just okay, we don't know what's going to happen with the trade deals, we don't know what's going to happen in the U.S. presidential election, and so while we're pretty optimistic about what's going on, we're going to continue to do business. It's probably going to be a bit of a year of caution just until some of that stuff gets until we know who the president is going to be in the U.S. and we see what happens with the future of trade, global trade, and some of these other factors that will affect them in pretty deep ways.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I know we're getting a little bit short on our podcast time. Is there anything else that you want to cover from your trip?
We did I think those are the things, the big takeaways. I wrote up a lot of this and a lot more, put links to some other stories in a takeaways article at our website. So people, as per usual, can go to nreionline.com to check that out. Also in the story, do link to the homepage for for the real estate forums. They do. I think this is one of the Toronto Real Estate Forum is the biggest event I think they do, but they do a series of these all across the country, and they also do some really good topical events too. So if folks want to check that out, there's a link in the story to the stuff they're doing.
All right, fantastic. I encourage everybody to check that out. I've got one more thing that I'm going to ask you there, David. Now that you've been up into Canada and you've done a little bit of research for us, when we talk about the parent company Informa, one thing always crosses my mind, and that's a rap song from the early 90s. Do you remember that by any chance? Informa?
Oh, you're talking about Snow?
Yes. So Snow, the rapper Snow. I'm not in conspiracy theories here, David, but he is a Canadian rapper. Is there any correlation whatsoever?
Not that I'm aware of, but I will check it out.
David, you're hesitating. Is there something we need to know? I'm just kidding. Okay, so Informa has run another great couple of conferences, and I know that your travel wasn't the most pleasant to and fro, but it sounds like you learned a ton, and if people want to reach out to you, they can do that. I know that we've given out the information before. You've got the articles, but if they want to hear more about your travel experience, I would encourage them to give you a call, and then you can share more of this information with them. Would that be all right with you?
Yeah, that would be fine.
All right, David, thank you so much for your time today. It was great. Welcome back to the States, and I'm glad you were safe and enjoy the rainy Monday, brother.
All right. Enjoy your snow.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe put on some snow too.
That's exactly what I'm going to do right now, just for nostalgia purposes. All right, and thank you, audience, for listening to the Common Area Podcast with David Bodamer. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when David comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your coworkers. Thank you so much for listening today. For everyone at NREI, this is Eric Johnson inviting you back in 2 weeks for all the stories that matter to you. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Common Area Podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of NREI or Informa. The content has been made available for information and educational purposes only.